Now Jacob had 12 sons. They were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Zebulun, Issachar, Dan, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Joseph, and Benjamin. Now these 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel as we know it today. And Jesus came through the tribe of Judah. Okay, so just so you know that in future reference. Now, of Jacob's 12 sons, he had 4 wives, and one of his wives, her name was Rachel, whom Jacob likely loved the best. And her sons with Jacob were Joseph and Benjamin. Now, Joseph was the oldest of Rachel, and Benjamin was the youngest. Dad Jacob preferred Joseph and Benjamin, while the other 10 had to go to work. Joseph and Benjamin stayed around the tents and helped around the yard or whatever, just so he could keep an eye on them, no doubt. Well, years went by, and the 10 brothers, Reuben through Naphtali, they became jealous of Joseph. Joseph was known as a dreamer, and he was having dreams, and he would say strange dreams to these brothers, and these dreams were referencing the brothers would someday fall down before him and worship before him. And they got very jealous of him. And they were done with him. Basically, they could not speak to him peacefully at all. And one day, Dad, Jacob, he made Joseph a coat of many colors, which would be very rare in those days to have all these different color fabrics, and made a jacket for him, but not for anybody else. So Joseph goes out one day to check on his brothers. Dad told him to go. And when they saw Joseph coming, these 10 brothers said, let's just kill him, and we'll see what becomes of his dreams. And they caught him, and they decided, as they threw him in a pit, how they were going to kill him, and all the mischief that there was going on in their family and among those brothers. The oldest brother, Reuben, had an idea. A Midianite caravan was coming through, and he stopped them, and he says, hey, you want to buy somebody? We'll sell you a slave. And they said, sure. So they bought Joseph. So they sold their brother to the Midianite caravan, and he was trucked off to Egypt to become a slave. And what they did is they took that coat and ripped it up and put animal blood all over it, and they brought it to Jacob, and they said, do you know whose this is? We found this out in the wilderness or whatever, in the field. And Jacob had a meltdown, which is understandable. He thought a wild beast ate his son, and he was so broken by it. Unbeknownst to him, Joseph was sold into Egypt by this caravan. Now Joseph ends up at a man called Potiphar, who was a very powerful man in the kingdom of Egypt. And Joseph, everything he did, let's just say whatever he touched turned to gold. God blessed Joseph as he served Potiphar. And he got to the point where he was the number one servant, and probably had a very cushy life, telling everybody what to do in Potiphar's house. And he was a very good man, and he was a loyal man, and he was a man of integrity. This is who Joseph was. And one day Potiphar's wife started making passes at Joseph. And Joseph said, she even confronted him, said, come on, let's go right now. And he said, no, my master said, I can have anything in his house except for you. And she wasn't satisfied with that, so she kept on and on and on. And Joseph, being a man with integrity, ran from her. So there was a day that Potiphar was gone on some kind of campaign, and Potiphar's wife approached Joseph and said, "Come on, lie with me." And he said no, and he was at the point of getting dressed, and she grabbed his robe and ripped it off him, and in her fury she went running into the where all the servants were, and she said, "He tried to attack me, holding his clothing, his robe." And so Joseph was thrown into prison. Joseph, he knew he had this call of God, but he didn't know where it was all going. It was just incredible. So he's in prison. He's sad, and one day he has two other prisoners, a butler and a baker, that are thrown in the Pharaoh's prison also. And he interprets their dreams. He had a gift of interpreting dreams. And he interprets their dream, and he tells one, "You're going to be killed. You're going to be executed." And he tells the other, "You're going to be restored to your place." And so just as he said, it happened. Now he told the butler, he says, "When you go back and you see Pharaoh, get me out of here, okay? Don't forget me." He'd already been in there several years. And he said, "Sure, okay." And everything happened like Joseph said. The butler was restored, and the baker was put to death. But he forgot all about Joseph. Years goes by, and Joseph's still in prison. Can you imagine what Joseph was thinking in his head? "I thought I was called of God. I thought God had a purpose for me in my life, and look at me. I'm going to spend my life in prison for something I didn't even do." And so one day Pharaoh started having dreams, and he was furious because none of his wise men could tell him his dream or the interpretation. And this butler says, "Wait a minute. There was a man in prison," and he tells him the story, how he interpreted their dream. And they rushed Joseph out, washed him up, got him out of prison. He stood before Pharaoh. He told Pharaoh his dream and the interpretation of it. Now, the dream was that there was going to be 7 years of plenty in the land, and then 7 years of hard famine. And it was going to be such a terrible famine that all the world would come before the Egyptians and ask for food. And they'll be begging at their doorstep. And Pharaoh inquired, "What shall I do?" He says, "Well, you got to build grain elevators for the time of plenty and be ready for this. And basically, you can just sell to the people of the world, and without a fight, you could literally take over the known world just by taking all their gold and everything just for food." And Pharaoh, since Joseph interpreted his dream accurately, Pharaoh elevated Joseph to the number 2 man in the kingdom. Basically, just under the king himself, the Pharaoh, he was the president of the country. So he went from prisoner to president overnight. And so he began immediately a task to store up grain. The 7 years of plenty go by, and then the 7 years of famine come along. And one day, Jacob told his sons, the 10 sons, not Benjamin, he says, "Go and beg for food in Egypt." And so they left, and when Joseph saw them, he was furious. No doubt in his heart he thought, they did not recognize Joseph. He was grown. But he looked at them, and I'm sure he had disdain in him, and he began to really kind of torture them in a sense, emotionally, saying, "You're spies, you're spies." And they said, "No, we're not." And then he said, "Prove yourself." And they said, "Well, we have a brother that died, and we have one more younger brother that's at home with his dad." And he said, "You will not be cleared by me unless you bring that youngest brother to me. Let me see him." And Joseph longed to see his brother, Benjamin. And so they were worried. They thought on their way to go get their brother, they thought everything that happened to our brother Joseph has come upon us. The wrath of God is on us. They were really worried. And so they go, and Dad is saying, no way, you're not taking Benjamin. That Pharaoh will kill all of you guys because he accused you as spies. And they said, well, we're going to die anyway of starvation, so we got to take a risk. So they go and they stand before Joseph. And when Joseph sees Benjamin, he weeps. He goes in the other room and weeps. And they were looking at him like, what in the world? Why is this guy upset? And finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He forgave his brother. He says, I'm Joseph. And they look at him like, oh no, we're dead. Because they knew that this guy could just have him executed immediately for what they had done. He said, no, but I forgive you, because what you planned for evil, God planned for good. You set me up so I could save life and for the world and store up food. And he told them about the 7 years of famine that are upon them. And so they had to go back and face up to their father and tell him the big lie that they told. But Jacob, once he got over the shock that his son Joseph was still alive, they all came. There were 70 of them total with their children. They all came to live on the outskirts of Egypt in the land of Goshen. And so Joseph was blessed, and he had children and sons, and was given a wife from Pharaoh, and all was well with Joseph. But eventually Joseph died, and the children of Israel multiplied, the 12 tribes of Israel, over a long period of time, and a new Pharaoh rose up that did not know Joseph. And he is talking to his servants and saying, man, there is a lot of people here, and they could get together with an army and overthrow us. So what he did was come up with a plan to put them into bondage. And so the nation of Israel, the children and the families of the 12 tribes of Israel, end up in Egyptian bondage for 400 years. Now, this was for sinning against God's laws. It causes judgment. Okay? So this is Egyptian bondage, and where we'll go to in the next page will be Moses and the deliverance out of Egypt.